Tu.
Ovviamente.
Chi una?
Shalom Sabar.
Ah, certo, ora ci sarà. Chi vedrà.
Ottimo. Perché lui
He's the professor of half of the museum staff.
כן.
הוא נמצא שלום?
לא ראיתי שהוא נכנס, אבל יכול להיות שהוא ייכנס עוד מעט.
כן, הוא...
He's not here at the moment.
Mi ha detto che è in contatto con te per certi oggetti. È uno dei più importanti professori sull'arte ebraica, devi sapere.
Infatti, sì.
Allora, io direi di cominciare. Allora, dirò qualche parola in ebraico e poi passo all'inglese. חברים יקרים, היום אנחנו מארחים יהודי מפירנצה בשם גבריאל מנקוזו, שהוא בעצם הנורמן אלכסנדר פמילי פונדיישן דירקטור of the Eugene Grand Jewish History Program at the Medici Archive Project. Allora, questo è il suo titolo, diciamo, questo è הטייטל שלו במסגרת הזאת שהוא מדבר עליה. עם זאת, צריך להגיד שגבריאל, שאנחנו קוראים לו ללה, הוא דוקטור בפירנצה, והוא מייצג, הוא בעצם מוזיקולוג ויצר מעין חברה שעוסקת במוזיקה יהודית, והדבר הזה מעסיק אותו מאוד. לאחרונה הוא נכנס לפרויקט...
Thing flying around.
בבקשה, אני מבקש שקט. הוא נכנס לפרויקט של תערוכה באופיצי של בית מדיצ'י והיהודים, וזה בהחלט נושא מעניין, נושא מרתק, וכנראה התערוכה תיפתח במהלך שנה או שנה וחצי, אני חושב. בכל אופן, במסגרת הזאת, גם מצא את דמותו של אותו צייר, יונה אוסטיליה, שהיה בעצם כמעט לא ידוע. סבי, אומברטו קסוטו, משה דוד קסוטו, כותב עליו ב-1907, אבל הוא יודע עליו מעט מאוד באותה תקופה. הוא, סבא באותו מאמר, מזכיר גם שני ציירים אחרים, איטלקים, יהודים. אחד זה מוזה דה קסטלצו, שהוא מהעיר ונציה, שהיה במאה ה-16, ואת קוזמטורה, שהוא היה מהעיר פררה במאה ה-15. אז זאת אומרת, יש לנו דוגמה של 3 ציירים, איטלקים יהודים, במהלך העת החדשה, ולא פלא שכולם איטלקים, כי כנראה קשה יהיה למצוא בגלויות אחרות ציירים יהודים. אז אנחנו נעבור לאנגלית, בגלל שללה מעדיף לדבר אנגלית, ואני אגיד כמה מילים באנגלית. דוקטור גבריאל Mancuso is the Norman A. Alexander Family Foundation Director of the Eugene Grant Jewish History Program at the Medici Archive Project. In addition, Lele, as we call him, is also a musicologist who specializes in Judaic music and working in this field for many years. He has established an international organization for Judaic music. These days, he is organizing an exhibit on the Jews in the Medici court, which will be displayed at the Uffizi Museum in Florence next year. He will tell us about a Jewish painter, Jona Ostiglio, or Ostiglia, staying in the Medici court in the 17th century. My grandfather, Umberto Moshe David Cassuto, wrote about him an article in Vesilo Israelitico in 1907, mentioning two other Jewish Italian painters, Mosè da Castellazzo from Venice from the 16th century, and Cosmetura from Ferrara, the 15th century. It is not casual that all the three Jewish painters in the New Age are from Italy. Lele, the floor is yours. Lele.
Lele, you are silent.
You are silent. You have to...
סליחה. רציתי לומר שאני מבין עברית, מדבר קצת עברית, אבל לא ליברתי עברית בכמה שנים, ועכשיו אני לא יכולה לעשות שיעור שלם בעברית, אבל מבין ומדבר קצת ולקרוא. אם אתם רוצים לשאול משהו אותי באנגלית או בעברית, yeah. So I will be speaking in English today because it's much easier for me, okay? But as I said, I understand a bit. So I'm very pleased to be with you today. It's an honor to be here and to speak to David, my friend, a very good friend of mine, one of my best friends in Italy and in Israel too, of course, and to somehow to reconnect with these grandfathers' discoveries and to see what happened in the meanwhile. And then we spent, and he mentioned that in 1907, his grandfather wrote an article and in Vesilo Israelitico, one of the most important journals in early 20th century Italy, mentioning the existence of a manuscript kept in the National Library in Florence with the biography of a Jewish painter called Jona Ostiglio. This is the first mention, the first academic mention, I would say, about Jona Ostiglio. And then there will be 10 years after that, in around 1917, 1918, he also re-mentioned Jona Ostiglio in one of the 1,000 footnotes of his lengthy book about the Florentine Jews and Jews in Florentine Medici Florence, the very famous book published in 1918. So what happened while I was when I was working on the exhibition about the Jews and the Medici and the Ghetto, of course, that will be displayed next year, I came across this article. I remember that article that I read a long time ago, but never paid attention to the fact that there was a Jewish painter mentioned in this article. And there was something very crucial that he said, that Umberto Cassuto said. This Jewish painter was not only very well known by other professional painters, non-Jewish painters in 17 Florence, but also he had commissions by the Medici. And this was absolutely brand new for me, and I started looking for the works. I mean, he said if he had commissions by the Medici, since the Medici were recording everything that is belonged to them, from real estate, houses and villas, and the ghetto itself, okay, then I presume that something had to be recorded about also the commissions of paintings and works in general. So what happened? We basically tried to trace back all the detail, about these payments. First, the life by 17th century Camillo Sagrestani. He was also a painter and almost contemporary of
It's something in the line is not okay.
What is that in this short but very dense now?
Gabriele, we have a problem with the connection. Can you yours? Because we cannot hear well.
Okay, just give me 30 seconds. I change the line, okay? I'll turn my video off, okay? Just for a second, okay?
דניאל?
כן, דוד.
Is it not working better?
The
better now?
yes.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Now I am a parent, so sorry. And I was mentioning the fact that this article, published in 1907, Umberto referred to a manuscript kept in the National Library in Florence. And basically what I did was to go there and to read his biography. And what the element that they found in these short texts.
Lele, we still have a problem. We still have a problem, Lele.
These manuscripts said that Jona Ostiglio. Okay, just a minute.
אנחנו מאוד מתנצלים על התקלות. אנחנו מקווים שתכף זה יסתדר.
One moment.
Yes.
Super. Now, is it better now?
Yes.
Let's try.
Okay, I will try it. Okay, just let me know and if it works. So in these articles, I said, Umberto mentioned something very important, that Jona was an inhabitant of the ghetto, that he was practicing painting unprofessionally. Oh, sorry, does it work?
It does.
Okay. That he was an inhabitant of the ghetto, that he was, that he started, practicing paintings first as a self-taught person. And then, since he was, so passionate about works, he also joined the studio or the atelier of a professional, very well-known painter of the time called Onorio Marinari. Now, how did he started, practicing painting? You know that, living in the ghetto meant not only living in a specific place and abided by very strict rules of, segregation and physical separation from the Christian majority, but also meant to be impossible for the Jews to join professional associations like the guilds, especially. So if you wanted to be an artisan or a painter or a sculptor, you had to join the guilds, and the guilds were normally confessional, were basically confessional associations, Christians, where you were supposed to be Christian and to practice Christian faith. So he couldn't be a professional painter or studying the curricula as normally it would have been. Then he basically started self-teaching painting by copying the works of a very well-known, very famous painter of the time called Salvador Rosa. Salvador Rosa was considered one of the most important 17th century artists, especially for sacred artworks, but not only sacred arts, but not only. And at a point that the copies that he was making were undetectable from the original, he seems to be very good in copying works of Greek artists, basically. So then what happened? Then he joined, unofficially, I suppose, the atelier of these Onorio Marinari. As you can see the text here down in the lower part of the text. And this atelier was located not that far from the ghetto. We'll show you now where it was. So this is in the red, can you see the red square, the rectangle here?
Nope.
Can you see it? Can you see the rectangle here?
Now we see the map of the ghetto.
Okay, this is the red one is the ghetto basically, and the green square here is the court, basically the block where this atelier was located. It was located, as you can see, not that far from the ghetto, still inside the city center. It was one of the most important artistic atelier of the time. And while working in this atelier, supposedly we think that he came across a lady and described as a beautiful Christian widow, rich too. So Jona Ostiglio fell in love with this lady, and they probably then explain us that at a point, someone dressed like a friar, so a fake friar, we suppose, or probably a real friar, but being jealous, tried to kill him, stabbing him with a knife, okay, and also to bury him in the same court of the atelier. He escaped. The lady was kidnapped by this fake friar, and then our biography said, at the end of the story, I can tell you for the honor of our friend Ostiglio and the lady what happened after that. So we don't know exactly what happened with this lady, but supposedly he had an affair, he had a personal contact. The point is, apart from the gossip, what is really important, this artist is part of the artistic social fabric of 17th century Florence. Is not only escaping the ghetto, working outside the ghetto and practicing legally prohibited, but it's also having a personal contact with someone not belonging to his own community. So this is something quite interesting. He's a sort of a whimsical, figure of the time. So we have a second source, by the way, and this is, written by Saverio Balducci, another 17th century, 18th century, early 18th century author, who wrote another Vita di Artisti, Life of Artists, where he mentioned the fact that Jona Ostiglio was in very good terms with Antonio Giusti, another very important painter of the time, that he was in good terms with other, painters of the time in Florence. Not only Giusti was quite famous, but, with the average artists of the time. They were making, all these 3-4 people, they're making a sort of a gang of friends, going around Florence and enjoying life and then sharing their own practical and professional features, which is really interesting then. But then we have a third source that has not been considered properly, I think. This is a very long text explaining that while he was very good in making copies of, other people's paintings, one of Jona's, fortes basically was landscape and still lifes. Why? Well, because he was not that good in making human figures or profiles or silhouettes. So he had to ask other people. In this case, Antonio Bracciolini is someone who nowadays almost totally unknown. He was asking these Bracciolini to make the human figure in his own landscapes, Jona, but also normal practice. But it's not surprising that while a painter is making something, okay, he's asking for help to other artists. That was commonplace at the time. It would be commonplace for great artists of the time. So absolutely not a strange event. One of the interesting passages of these texts is that Bracciolini was somehow is the only one feeling anti-Jewish sentiments against Jona Ostiglio, calling him Ebreaccio or Judeaccio, sort of a dirty Jew, okay, using derogatory terms. But the author of these Vita too said, okay, but while he was offending him, there was another person defending Jona. So Jona seems to be really integral part of the environment, of the Florence environment, somehow loved by other fellow colleagues. Now, what do we know about his genealogy? We recently came across a lot of data that we took from the National Archive and the Jewish Community in Florence Archive. We know a lot about his family now. We know that he was born to Flaminio. Flaminio was his father. Interesting to know that Ephraim was the name, but Flaminio was the current non-Hebrew name that he was using in everyday life. That he was the brother of Manuel Ostiglio, who was married to Dolce, okay, who died in 1723. We reconstructed some ties, some connections, not all of them. Most of these connections are uncertain for the time being. You see the question marks, but the family was can be understood as a sort of a medium average family. 4 brothers and sisters, whatever, each one having 4 or 5 sons and kids in general. So Jona, we don't know if he got married. We don't think so. We never found, evidence that he got married. What about his life? He died at a certain point, and after the year 1695 is the terminus ad quem. Okay, he died essentially after this date. Okay, it's the last date mentioned in the document that we found so far. So we suppose that since at that time it was customary, for the expressions, to die around the age of 60 or 70, something like that. That he was born in 1620, 1630, maybe. Okay, but we haven't found any information, evidence of birth or death or something like that. All the registers have been destroyed, lost, so we don't have information about his, the extreme of his life, the beginning and the end. But this is the story. So we identified his house. He lived in the Ghetto Florence in a small house, relatively small house, together with his brother, Emmanuel. Emmanuel played a key role in his life. He was not only his brother, and also the guy who paid for the rent of his apartment. He was also the person who was collecting the money by the commissioners. So while Ostiglio was commissioned works by, as we will see now, by Medici and other noble families in Florence, Emmanuel was the guy who practically had the role of collecting money to get paid. Okay, so he was a sort of an agent, we suppose. That's another hypothesis, of course. So the house of Jona Ostiglio and the Ostiglio family is not that big, but it's not that small. So if you look at the apartment in the Ghetto Florence, this is to be quite a sort of a lavish apartment, a decent one, okay, a nice one, multiple floor, not that big, but still decent, interesting. Now, the apartment was located in the extremity of the so-called Ghetto Vecchio Florence. And you can see the arrow here. It was in here, in this corner, okay? Basically, is the border of the so-called Ghetto Vecchio established by Cosimo I in 1570. This part will be established much later by Cosimo III. This is the ghetto that existed at the time of Jona Ostiglio. And this is the photo that they took, one of the photos that we found of the apartments, of course, renovated in the 19th century, in the following century, where the house was originally located. Now, we also found evidence about his involvement in civil cases. You know that inside the Ghetto Florence, there were a lot of judges, secular judges or massari, political leaders of the 2 main communities making up the Jewish population of the ghetto, the so-called Italian nation and Levantine nation. He belonged to the Italian Jewish community, and both communities, each community, had its own massari or leaders. Serving also has civil judges, in the ghetto. So we found a case dating 1st January 1672, where Jona is asking for justice because he asked a couple of fellow co-religionists in the ghetto, Bondi and Levi, to rent a space on the ground floor, and we supposed to make a sort of an atelier. It was a big empty space on the ground floor, and we supposed to make it for his own professional purposes, to make paintings or work professionally. Since the apartment of the place was not fit enough or fixed properly as promised before the contract, he was asking the judges to get rid of these pre-contractual measures and to get rid of the payments, basically. So it existed, basically. That's the key point. The case is not interesting. The point is that he was looking for a space inside the ghetto, and supposedly around the same time or soon after, they joined the atelier of Onorio Marinari outside the ghetto. So it was trying somehow maybe to import professional painting inside the ghetto, making it in the ghetto. It's an hypothesis, of course. Okay. Now, what about commissions by non-Jews? A friend of mine called Pasquale Focarile, years ago, 2017, published a lengthy book about the Manelli family. The Manelli were noble family, rich family, not extremely rich. They are not the Medici, but still, very high in the hierarchy. And there is evidence that Jona Ostiglio was commissioned 4 landscapes, the decoration of a so-called orologio all'antica, or a table clock, and then also to recreate the family tree of the Manelli family. We haven't identified the 4 landscapes commissioned by the Manelli, and we haven't identified the clock. But just to give you an idea what it meant decorating a 17th century clock, it doesn't mean, you know, putting very mini things into, you know, unvaluable object. A clock was considered a very precious object, especially a table clock done by wood, okay, as in this case. These are plausible connections, you know, clock that exist, survived the time, 17th century Tuscany clocks that I've identified so far. These are not 100% the clock that it was decorating, but these are the type of clock that it was working on. So this is not yet painting, canvases, okay, still only decoration. Look at these. This is an interesting clock where we have the, as you can see here, for instance, there were some table clocks with the arm of the Medici. So that's not an easy task, not such a superficial work to do. Okay, that's the dynasty main art put in the clock. So this clock maybe belonged to the Medici, and was it one of the clocks that he was decorating for the Manelli and the Medici? God knows, probably. Okay, then this is the family tree of the Manelli family. This family tree is located nowadays in the reading hall of the National Archive. This painting over the decades since 1988 or 84, when the old National Archive was moved from front of the Arno River up to the new site, and this is what he did. Basically, he was in charge of creating of depicting of these small landscapes behind the tree. So as you can see here, these details are not that bad. It seems to be quite professional, right? You know, he's a good hand. But now we need to go to the point. How do we come across the Medici commissions? I basically follow the same method that I was, you know, practicing in studying the Ghetto of Florence. Now, let me do a parenthesis. You know, let me open a small chapter. The Ghetto of Florence belonged to the Medici. That is a crucial point. The area of the ghetto, the buildings, the rents, was going everything to the Medici. belonged to the Medici. So the ghetto was established by Cosimo I in the year 1570-71, belonged to the Medici. This is why we know everything about the Ghetto of Florence in terms of architecture, in terms of payment, in terms of events or, you know, accidents happening in the ghetto, because the ghetto belonged to the Medici and it was supervised, described, controlled as any other Medici property around Tuscany or even outside Tuscany. So if you know that the Medici own something like a house or a real estate in Lazio, in Rome, or in Venice, there must be a document in the Rhone archive surviving still today. So I did basically the passage. I moved backward. I tried to trace the payments. I tried to trace the ownership of these paintings until we came across, it was not only me, it was me and other people working at the Uffizi and my own foundation, the Medici Project. We identified 4 landscapes. So look at these. This is the first we identified. Nowadays, this painting is located in the Pitti Palace, that is part of the Uffizi galleries, okay? And up to unknown 17th century Florentine Tuscany. So this is a painting that it was bought by the Medici, and it was set in one of the villas that they had. Especially, I think it was located in Villa Imperiale, not one of the minor places that the Medici owned at the time. So if you look at the details, you can see that the quality of the painting is quite good. The figures are made probably the weak points, but they can be attributed to Bracciolini, but that's my joke, of course. Then we identify, look at the details here, the cascade, the people, or whatever sort of, view on an ancient decadent city. You can see the quality here of these images that are not that bad. I would say that's quite decent. It's the quality of the painting is not that bad, okay? This is another landscape that we identified. In this case, as I will tell you right in a second, we have an element that is very crucial. This bridge exists today, okay, is in Tuscany, and it bears the arm of the Medici. Now look at the color of the sky, or the figures. It seems to be quite, very interesting, quite well done. But look at this detail. Okay, look at these. You can see the arm of the Medici, the 6 balls in here. Now this landscape is now located in Rome at the Farnesina Ministry of Foreign Office. Okay, so this is was basically lent to these to the Foreign Office Ministry, maybe presumably around 1970, the early 1970s, and remain over there. In order to identify the location, we had to follow several steps, but basically the idea was to read the registers of the properties of the Medici, and then to see the movement, the passages, the vicissitudes and the travels of these paintings, okay? To deal with still lifes. Still lifes are really interesting. I mean, I'm not an art historian. I can't judge, stylistically about this painting, which is really interesting, but, what I noticed as a profane person, not a non-expert on art history, I noticed that these fishes seems to be quite human somehow. The forms are interesting, but not departing from the normal path of any still life, okay? And now here is not that visible, but look at these details. So look at these, it's another still life that we identified. This is now at the Uffizi Gallery today, okay, in one of the repositories of the museum. Look at the crab. The crab is somehow looking at you with human eyes. I don't want to say too much. I don't want to emphasize too much about the anthropomorphic figures and features of these animals, but the mouth, the eyes of these animals, that they should be, at least. I don't want to say that anthropomorphic, that is too much, but at least tending to be like the eyes and the mouth of humans. Look at these. Look at these beautiful eyes of this crab. And it seems to be like hair, is the only surviving animal in this sort of a desolation of death. All the fishes are gone. Some of these fishes are unusually and practically straight up over the air. You can see here on the right side here, look at this fish. It should be dead, but it's rigid. It's like strong, stays solid over, standing vertically, which is unnatural, of course. The only one looking at you somehow personally with a sort of a humor is the crab, okay? I don't think there is any connection about the fact that the crab is not kosher. Forget it. That was commissioned by the Medici from their own places, supposedly for the kitchen, okay? Or, when we speak about the kitchen, we are speaking about big places, official places where things are done or cooked, but not only, okay? And now we identified another still life. This painting is now located in another Medici villa, which is Poggio Caiano, which is like 20 kilometers from the city center of Florence. It's quite ruined. You can see here the condition of the canvas, and the color is terrible. I mean, that has been forgotten for a long time, that the conditions are really bad. They should be restored and fixed. It will be doing it, but not in a short time. And look at these, what happened here. A piece of the canvas is still, standing, but the color has gone forever, so it's been destroyed basically. Okay, but I don't want to, complaining. I don't want to complain about the fact that the Italian authorities are not taking care of the paintings. This is something that happens when you have millions of things to take care of these things properly. We have an enormous quantity, an over quantity of artworks still in our museums. Now, this is another still life where you can see, as I said, anthropomorphic forms of the lips, of the mouth of these fishes. Or these fishes should be dead. But if you look at their eyes, it seems to be looking at you somehow personally, somehow, mercifully, or asking for piety, So I don't want to say that these species, these still lives are humanized, but to let's say, at least to say there is something personal in making these still lifes. I've been looking at other still lifes and orders of the time. You can imagine we have thousands still lifes in Italy produced in the 17th century. In my view, one of the key features of these still lifes is to be somehow anthropomorphic, somehow interpreting nature in human terms, okay? I don't know if it is a feature of Jona Ostiglio, his own poetical language or not, or just a coincidence, but it's something that seems to be over-present in his paintings, okay? Now, look at the detail. Let me show you the eyes, the mouth in here, okay? I'm not an expert of fishes too, so it could be that these fishes are really like that, but I don't think so, okay? They're beautifully done, okay? And now we go to the final, in my view, final point, which is this portrait. This portrait is beautiful. It's not only beautiful in terms of, you know, iconic features. And now let me tell you what happened with this painting. This painting is somehow uncertain in terms of attribution and provenance. This is part of a collection of the abbot, Antonio Pazzi, who sold the collection to the Uffizi Gallery in 1768. So a few decades after the death, I would say 70 years after the death of Jona Ostiglio. So what we have in between the death of Jona Ostiglio, presumably around the beginning of the 18th century, and the selling of this collection is 70 years, basically 2 generations, okay? So interesting, important to notice that. The abbot sold these so-called series of self-portraits to the galleries in 68, and there are a lot of portraits or self-portraits. In this case, what we read behind the canvas is something really interesting. It's written, David Isaia Tedesco, dis, D-I-S, di Jona Ostiglio. Now, what does it mean? We have someone called David Isaia Tedesco. We don't know if it is the painter of the guy portrayed in this painting, and we have to interpret these. Someone said disegno di, on the form, done by. Another interpretation is the disciple, discepolo, is a student or a pupil of Jona Ostiglio. A third, I would say quite similar to the first hypothesis, is that this means dissero. People attribute to, according to the voices that should be of Jona Ostiglio. So in any case, wouldn't be embrace the first hypothesis of the second, we had to do with the paintings that was done probably by Ostiglio or by someone who was his disciple. And this is crucial in any case. We have someone making portrait of humans, okay? In this case, Jona Ostiglio was supposed to be bad in making human figures, but in this case is beautiful, okay? Or someone else, 70 years later or 50 years later, depends, who was his pupil making human figures, and in this case, a portrait. This is absolutely astonishing, beautiful. Now, what do we get from this story? You know, first of all, we don't have any Jewish element in these paintings. And these, paradoxically, I wouldn't say this is unsurprising or, you know, making a bit upset. No, this is the point. The fact that normality of Jona Ostiglio's paintings are the key feature to understand his role and his exceptionality. He was making, let's say, between inverted commas, normal paintings as a Jew, as a professional painter, mostly, most important to do, that was a professional painter making professional paintings, okay? This is crucial. That is the oldest, as far as we know, the oldest professional painter that existed, in Italy at least. We don't know anybody before Jona being professionally recognized as a painter, belonging to an academy. I forgot to tell you that in certainly since 1684 until 95, the terminus ad quem, Jona belonged to the Accademia del Disegno, one of the most important artistic association in Florence. It's like today the Accademia della Crusca for the language, or I don't know what else, the Academy of Language in Jerusalem, okay? One of the most prestigious association for arts. And those who were admitted to this association had to be Christians. Now, most of his friends, the people mentioned in the biographical sketches that we saw before, belonged to the Academy, including his own master, Onorio Marinari. So was he part of the Academy because he was somehow recommended, or because he was, in fact, very good in painting? Remember that being part of the Academy is not a joke. You had to be admitted to prove that you are a good painter, to make an exam, basically, okay? And then you could pass. And every year you had to pay, and we found the payment of his membership, okay? At least since 1684 up to 95 for a minimum of 11 years, okay? And he's the only one who was admitted in the history, at least in the old days of this association, this academy, who was Jewish. Now, one of the questions I was asking myself, this happened because it was an exception to the rules. After all, we are in Italy and we do a lot of exceptions to the rules. And I'm somehow is a shame, but also sometimes it's interesting, because making exceptions to the rules means solving problems, and that could be, somehow bypassing the problems. Now, not admitting Jona Ostiglio to the Academy could means not allowing him to make paintings for the Medici. Is this the reasons why? It might be. We are still researching on these, things. But it might be that his role as a painter was somehow crucial or turning into an Academy member. Okay. Now, this is, for the time being today, the main story. So if you have questions, if you have criticism or doubt or something to tell me, to discuss about, I'm here. I will be very glad to hear you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gabriele. Very, very interesting. And I open to the public. Perhaps they will ask in Italian or in Hebrew. So try to understand and to answer naturally in English. So
sure.
If someone wants to ask, please. I want
Shalom.
to see.
Mishu, shalom. Shalom Saba.
Yes. Nice to see you.
Great to see you.
Very interesting, I must say. Big discovery, to be sure. My question is, looking at the Florentine Jewish art of the time, how can the Jewish community allow that such thing will happen? One thing, and the second, where was he educated? Because members of the academy had long practice before they joined the academy, and the Jew was not usually in the academy. They were not, they produced what we call folk art, and this is really not folk art. So he was educated academically somewhere, and how this could have happened. What are your ideas about this?
Sure. We know for sure, first of all, thanks Shalom for your question. What we know for sure about education, he started painting at the age of 32, quite late in his life, as a self-taught person. So he was self-teaching paintings. In the first biographical text that we saw before, it is written, he started as a self-teaching person, and he was buying the paintings of Salvador Rosa. I don't think he was really buying paintings by this very famous person. He was probably somehow approaching these paintings, somehow renting, or somehow getting closer to them, and then making copies by himself. Now, I don't know how this is real or plausible. I don't know, I'm not an expert in paintings, but I suppose in order to make, the powders and the colors and the canvases, you need a sort of a professional technical background. You can't do everything by yourself. Canvas is okay. You can just use a liner or something like that, but you know, all the brushes and the colors are different somehow. I don't know. But he was a self-taught person, but then he joined, remember, this is crucial, he joined the atelier of Onorio Marinari. Onorio Marinari is a Baroque, very famous artist, especially for, you know, sacred Christian art. He was educated somehow over there. He was part of this environment. Is not said he was admitted to the atelier, because saying he was admitted means to, you know, declare a sort of a violation. You can't admit a Jew, you know, your own atelier if you are part of a guild or an academy that is confessional. Okay, now that is the first step. He was self-taught, then he joined unofficially or officially, doesn't matter. He worked around the atelier of Marinari. He knew the technique, he learned the technique, even presumably by looking at people doing things. And then when he was admitted at the academy, he had already been commissioned works by noble families. We know for sure that in 84 he had, you know, 4 commissions by the Manelli, and then he was also commissioned other works by the Medici. So I presume that he started his, you know, curricula with Marinari, that he followed Marinari, that he was supported by Marinari and his friends somehow, to a point to be admitted to the Academy of Disegno, which is very prestigious and very, you know, professional, and to join it for minimum 11 years.
Lele, a question. How he is mentioned in the list of the painters of the Academy?
Sure.
There is the word Hebreo or not?
No. Interesting. Very good question, David. Very interesting question. Now, it's not mentioned like Jona Ostiglio Hebreo. It's mentioned only name and surname. Jona Ostiglio. Simple. And
how have you studied what happens in the archives, in the Jewish archives of the ghetto? If he is mentioned there somehow, or he is not recognized at all?
I have been digging into the archive that you know very well. Like I spent a year inside the archive. I've been looking to any potential information, demographic, birth, death, marriages, and anything, but I haven't found any data about him. You know, in the National Archive, sorry, in the archive of the Jewish community in Florence, there is nothing about him. But there is also no information about his potential conversion to Catholicism. And I was even thinking that having an affair with a Christian lady, he might have converted, but there is no record of his conversion. You know, the conversion list records, it's quite accurate. We know anybody who converted to Catholicism from Judaism, of course, is carefully recorded. And there is nothing about Ostiglio. He never converted. That is another point. The question that Shalom asked me before: how was he doing these? How he was his approach and relationship with the Jewish community behaving so strangely? Well, I don't know. We don't know. We don't have any voice from the Jews, you know, from the ghetto saying, "Oh, Ostiglio is becoming a painter. He had an affair with a lady, with a Christian lady. That is not good." Or I haven't found a letter of rabbis denouncing or, you know, excommunicating somehow or reproaching the Jona for how he behaved. Sorry. So it's I would say, David, that is we need to consider Jona in the wider context. Around the mid 17th century, there are a lot of Jews who are, you know, living outside the ghetto, illegally, unofficially, but permanently. You know that the ghetto was the so-called new ghetto was established by Cosimo III, the beginning 18th century, because 104 families were living illegally outside the ghetto. 104 families means more than 400 people, which is 50% of the Jewish population at the time. So since the mid 17th century, which is 1650, we have families and normal people, not only whimsical creatures like Jona or artists or freaks, you know, living outside the ghetto because they prefer to be there. They were paying rents, fake rents, to show that they were living in the ghetto, but in fact they were living outside with Christian servants and when nurses, not abiding by any major, ghettoization rule or canon laws, of the church. So we have to frame it into the wider context of, Florentine Jewry in the 17th century. There seems to be a lot of porosities, and transmission between Christians and Jews in the city of Florence.
In which community, to which community he belonged? To the Italian or to the Levantine? Because Ostiglia is a city in Mantua, near Mantua.
Sure.
So probably he came from Mantua, and there most of the people were Italian and not Levantine.
It's 100% member of the so-called Italian nation, Italian Jewish community. Yeah, it belonged to that community. Because when I mentioned, I mentioned the legal case that he had with Bondi and Levi, the two owner of the so-called owner. They were not owners basically, but he had a civil case with them, and the judges, the Massari, were the Massari of the Italian nation, of the Italian Jewish community. So he belonged to that community for sure.
Another question.
Sure.
From the map you show us, he is living in a prestigious place because he's in the corner to the Piazza della Fonte.
Exactly.
And he is in a very, very strategic point of the ghetto. And, and he lived there all his life, or we don't know?
That is another point. We don't know if he lived, he spent his entire life in that apartment or not. What I suppose that he used to be there for some part of his life, but that he spent a good chunk of his existence outside the ghetto. The so-called gossip story about the lady. It's how paradigmatic of his life, I think. He not only had an affair, which is a gossip, sexual, physical, whatever, it doesn't matter. That's not the point. He used to be part of the non-Jewish social fabric of Florence. He was in good terms with them. So why coming back to the ghetto if he could live outside and operate outside the ghetto, being part of these gang of friends? The second text mentioned that he was in such good terms with the other painters, that he was spending nights and evenings together with them, laughing and enjoying the company of these people. So it seems to be a nice person, being respected by others, enjoying life as he could.
Very interesting.
Yeah, but in that case, why the Jewish community did not use him, quotation marks? I mean, do we know? I guess we don't, but it would be fascinating to discover whether he collaborated to produce anything Jewish for the community.
Well, Shalom, what my hypothesis is that, was he commissioned any painting by Jewish families? Which is an hypothesis, why not? After all, I mean, we stick to the idea, especially in diaspora, as you know, that Jews are not in good terms with visual arts. Okay, but this is a sort of an old motto, or okay, fine. If you look at the documents produced by the judges of the in the ghetto, the same type of document we saw before, there are a lot of cases like inheritances where we have list of belongings, and I found a lot of paintings, including paintings done in the style of Salvador Rosa. So it seems that families like Bondi, Barrafael, Cafsuto, many others had paintings in their own houses.
As collectors, or to admire them, to enjoy them?
To enjoy them.
Not as merchants, not as merchants.
Not merchants. I mean, we can't say that. I found at least 4 families who had sacred images with David, and scenes from the Bible, according to the style and to the frames of Salvador Rosa. It means that visual art was part of the Florentine Jewish dialogue, or let's say language, social language. In the 19th century, let me give you this last tiny detail, but tiny but very interesting. You know, there was an historian called Carocci who was describing the city center of Florence before the big demolition of the city center in the 19th century. Okay, so he said, in the ghetto there are beautiful apartments, some of them with decorations and stuccos and beams decorated with colors, also with canvases representing scenes from the Bible. So this is a Christian historian entering the ghetto shortly before the demolition and saying, well, these apartments are not that bad after all. Some of them are very lavish, very luxurious, and some families have paintings of biblical scenes. So it's difficult to connect this 19th century information with our own painter, but it seems to be a continuation at least. Or at least, let's say, by exclusion. I haven't found in my studies anything like that in the Ghetto of Venice or in the Ghetto of Mantua or in other ghettos. There seems to be something quite Florentine in, you know, enjoying and having fun with images after all. Okay.
Well, David told us that, David, you told us when you were a child, your father used to take you to see all the pictures in the churches and so on. So maybe it's the same tradition that you were living in Florence as a child and saw everything on Shabbat, yes?
Yes, of course.
Excuse me, I'd like to ask,
But what I can say,
I want to ask something too.
please,
Do you know anything about his death, when he died, where he died, whether he's buried somewhere, how he died? We know only that he lived as Jona Ostiglio, but where did he finish his life?
Thanks for your question. We haven't found any information about this death. As I said before, the only information that we have so far is the year 1695, is the last mentioned date in official documents. So we suppose that he died after 1695. It could be 1700 or 1710, depends. Okay, we don't know exactly. All the registers, the death registers of those decades are gone. So do not exist in the Jewish Community Archive.
Thank you.
They are gone. So thanks to you for the question.
another point, the Ghetto Vecchio was inserted inside a Medici Palace.
Yes.
So probably, and then they divided it in little pieces for the houses of the Jews. Before the Jews entered, it was a very malformed place. It was of horse and thieves and so on. So but probably if it was originally a palace, a Medici palace, could be painting on the walls, on the ceilings from that time, not from the ghetto.
No, I wouldn't exclude. Thank you, David, for your note that inheriting somehow, let's say morally, metaphorically, visual elements coming from the old owners. Okay, the Jews could feel somehow in better terms with this language. If I'm accessing a house, or even I'm forced to live in a house when I have decoration on the beams, and we have a lot of colors and some frescoes or element of frescoes, it might be that I'm starting conceiving these elements as my own. That's a good hypothesis, of course. That's a working hypothesis. Yes.
Yeah, that probably. Other questions?
I have another question, if may I?
Sure.
It's going to be nudnik.
You can ask in Italian or in Hebrew if you want. It will be translated.
Okay, no, I see English is okay.
Susan.
You mentioned the Venetian community, the community of Rome, Mantova, Susan. But they were, looking again from the point of view of Jewish art, of this towns. They were much more open than Florence in this period. In the Renaissance, it's true that Florence was, let's say, above the other communities, and they produced some of the best, most beautiful Hebrew manuscripts. But in the ghetto period, they were more strict. I mean, as far as I can tell, when looking at Venetian Judaica of the 17th, 18th century, it's much more open to observe from the outside world, you can say, from the Italian world, and definitely Mantova and other towns, than Florence. Florence seems to be one of the strictest communities as far as their approach to what to include in their Judaica.
Yeah, exactly. Well, your question has to be, I would take your question and making a sort of a broader observation.
Yeah, that's all, yeah.
And I think, David, I hope you agree with me. I spoke about these two, Liana Funaro, who is a scholar of Florentine Jewry, very good one. And we agreed in a point. The Ghetto of Florence, for us historians, is silent for the 17th century and 18th century. What happens in Florence is relatively small, and I don't want to say insignificant. I want to say just more regular, sort of a daily, smooth daily life. We don't have the tragedies of other ghettos, or the diversities of the heterogeneous elements of the Venetian ghetto. There seems to be a quiet place, safe place for the Jews where to live, but also a place where nothing extraordinary happened, which is good for those who lived at the time, and bad for us in terms of novelty or exceptional elements. So I would take this observation and making it a bit broader, it seems. We don't know enough the Florentine ghetto in terms of 17th, 18th century. What happened over there in terms of, scholars and teachers and inquisitorial trials is not that much. Not because never happened, but probably that's another hypothesis, probably because it has not been studied so far. Mm-hmm. So for instance, I was looking at the inquisitorial trials in Florence, and it seems to be almost nothing. 200 years of segregation and only maybe 10 trials done. It seems implausible. It seems that there's a lack of study and lack of sources, or sources missing somehow. So what you said is correct. Florentine Jews in the ghetto seems to suffer more than others. I would say they seems to speak less to the others. But that's another super controversial point, as you can imagine.
In the research that you have done for the exhibition of the Jews and Medici, have you found some portraits of Jews? We have from Venice we have a beautiful portrait of the Caravaggio family, but do you have someone from Florence?
Well, no, unfortunately not. It could be if the guy in the portrait is David Isaiah Tedesco. It might be one of the inhabitants of the ghetto. It might be. We found a portrait of a Livornese Jew, Isaac Ocampos. Okay, that's another unknown, but it seems to be someone who was portrayed, but it's from Livorno. We haven't found a portrait or a self-portrait of someone. No, not at all.
From Florence?
Not from Florence. Only from Livorno and Pisa and others, but not Florence.
Publishing a book about Moshe Chaim Kafsuto. We searched his image, but we didn't find.
No, it's difficult. Yeah, I know that. Yes.
I
wouldn't exclude
that we published just now a book about the history and the travel of Moshe Chaim Kafsuto to the Holy Land, and it's just some days ago were printed. So it's in Italian, and I'm trying to translate it to Hebrew, but that's another thing.
It's a big, bunky, chunky volume. It's a big one, beautiful.
500 pages.
Yes. That's very well done, yeah.
In one of the early Florentine ketubot that Lele sent me, there is a capsuto. I don't know if you know.
Yes.
I should send it to David.
I want to ask something else. What about Cecil Roth and his studies about Florence? Does he relate to this period? I thought that Cecil Roth did write about the Renaissance Florence, didn't he?
Yes, definitely. He wrote. Yes, yeah. But
does he speak about painters or anything else?
No, not at all. The only one who spoke about Jona Ostiglio is David's grandfather, Umberto Cassuto. Yes, he's the only one. Yeah.
He was 25 years old when he wrote it.
1907.
Yes.
Peccato di gioventù.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Yeah. But can you imagine, for more than 100 years, this potential explosive topic, a Jewish painter, remained buried, not into the archive, which is understandable, into literature. I mean, historians, those who dealt with complicated issues, forgot that there was a guy called Ostiglio mentioned with the biographical information by Cassuto, and never tried to trace, to crisscross all these elements together. It was relatively easy when I did it. And I mean, I'm confident there will be finding more paintings by him, because I suppose that if someone produces a landscape of that quality, it must have been produced much more than that. And it cannot have done only 10 or 20 paintings. It has to have done like 40 something, lost, probably sold, auctioned, but it must be much more than that. Obviously, tracing the payment, the family properties takes long time, especially when you have to work on a major exhibition for the Uffizi. You don't have enough time to do it, but I'm keeping working on this.
Could it be possible that he changed his name?
It could be, but there is no evidence of that.
Because of the Inquisition or something like that? No. I
would say if he had converted, it could be, but there is no evidence that he converted. I mean, in my mind, maybe it's an intuition. I imagine Jona Ostiglio has someone quite, a brave person, getting rid of rabbinical and also social Christian rules. I mean, it has no problem, go over the borders, up and down. He's not taking, he never converted, so he never rejected, as far as we know, his faith and community, but he was not an observant person. So I don't want to go into the detail, but the text says quite clearly that he was enjoying the life with this lady, and his odors, we can't understand what it means, okay? So he was sort of a freak, let's say, a punk, someone who is living free, enjoying life, an artist in a most beautiful sense of the term.
He also did not change his name. I mean, Jona is not exactly a name that definitely tells who you are. I mean,
yeah. Exactly. Yes. Good point. Sure. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Thank you.
הקהילה לא החרימה אותו.
מה זה? מה קרה?
הקהילה היהודית לא החרימה אותו.
כן.
השאלה, the question if he was not
boycotted.
excommunicated by the community.
No, כן, understood, הבנתי. לא מצינו כלום על החרם מהקהילה. He was not banned or punished or excommunicated or unofficially, removed from the community. In my view, Jona Ostiglio is not that different from other coreligionists at the time in Florence. Florence seems to be quite a sort of a place where Jews and Christians are living quite together strictly, at a point that they are not making, as I said before, history. If by history we are referring to the exceptional events departing from daily life. We have there is a lot of evidence that Jews in the ghetto were co-owners of shops outside the ghetto. So they were unofficial co-owners shops located outside the ghetto with Christians. This is why, I mean, they survived, they prospered.
They could not belong to guilds.
Sorry?
They could not be part of guilds.
Well, officially they couldn't.
Of course. The guilds were confessional.
Well, they couldn't officially. You know, there is a big gap between the rules and the real reality, say, okay? So rules say you cannot live outside the ghetto, you cannot have servants, Christian servants and wet nurses, or even, you know, pay Christians to make a Goisha Shabbat. But this is what happened when in 1704, Cosimo III, remember that is really interesting, found out of the blue, apparently, but it's not true, that 104 families were living outside the ghetto with Christian servants and with a lot of wet nurses, Christian wet nurses, and hiring Christians for the Shabbat service. Oh, it seems to be a scandal. Okay, but this happened not with just one person, but with more than 400 individuals and families. So there seems to be quite a lenient position by the government, the Christian society toward the Jews. Then when Cosimo III, who's a very conservative, Bible basher, super confessional person, you know, understands what is going on, then he says, okay, listen, now we make a new ghetto, which is quite anachronistic. At the beginning of the 18th century, we have a ruler, expanding a ghetto while the ghettos are somehow going to the end. Yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
So what Shalom asked before is interesting. If he was commissioned by co-religionists, I'm now trying to trace evidence, textual evidence from the inheritances and the possessions. I found quite a lot of documents concerning the properties of the Jewish families, listing materials, every single item from the pillows and bed sheets and so on. Many of these families had paintings. I'm trying to understand if there is a connection between Jona the painter and potential paintings inherited or commissioned by the Jewish families.
Where do you look for?
There is an archival collection in the National Archive of Florence produced inside the ghetto called Nazione Israelitica. Is a big collection. It's like 73 volumes. And these collection gathers together all the judicial papers produced by the so-called secular judges or Nasari of the Jewish communities. So everything that was discussed by these judges is recorded carefully, and we have all the voices, the witnesses, and the cases. Most of these cases, as I said, are civil cases, not penal cases, okay? Civil cases concerning properties, transfers, and whatever, dowries, and so on. And in many of these volumes, we have list of, items belonging, being transferred for funding, for payment, and so on. But as you can imagine, I'm working by myself. So if I had like 10 interns digging into the archive and reading, understanding, that would be much easier for me.
I am willing to help.
Definitely, if you want,
Here in
and if you come,
only.
I accept any help. Yes.
When the exhibition will be on?
It should be at the end of 2023, a year from now, more or less.
A year from now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is, as Shalom knows, it's quite complicated. We still need to work on items they are discovering right now. Like a week ago, we came across a set of ketubot that had not been studied, at least that I didn't know properly, and produced in the 17th century. And I was shocked or surprised or really interested by this ketubot. They have beautiful decorations and micrography and images from the Bible. I was asking myself, are these produced by artists in the ghetto and probably by Jona Ostiglio himself? I don't know. That's another point. Yeah.
Okay. If there are not other questions, I have to thank very much.
Thanks to you. Thank you. Thanks everybody for today.
For his speech and his story. It's wonderful, very interesting. And I hope you will find more of that paintings in the future.
Yes, we will. I'm sure. Thank you so much everybody, שלום לכולם.
Grazie mille.
Goodbye.
Grazie.
Goodbye.
שלום, שלום.
שלום לכולם.
יאיר.
תודה רבה.
ערבים לכולם,
טוב
להתראות.
לשמוע את קולך.
יאיר,
צ'או דניאל. צ'או דוד.
צ'או, צ'או.
צ'או, צ'או.
להתראות בירושלים.
צ'או, צ'או.
דניאל, תודה על הכל.
אין בעד מה, בשמחה. צ'או.